presenting information about bird migration and about our bird friends that we'll see in our backyard over the winter. Before we begin, I want to let everyone know that this program, like all of Lisa's programs, are being recorded and are available on the library's website. You can refer back to her other programs that she did earlier this year. Also tonight, my co-host, Meg Overrocker from the University of Illinois Extension Office is on with us, and Meg will be coming on in just a minute. Hey, thank you.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name, again, is Lisa Sons. I am the Natural Resource Coordinator for Starved Rock and Matheson State Parks underneath the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. And I'm also a Master Naturalist volunteer through the University of Illinois Extension. I want to start off tonight's program on fall flights of fancy, mainly fall bird migration and some winter birds we might see in our backyards, by stating I am not an expert. I am not an ornithologist or a professor in the field. I am simply a naturalist that educates the public on the various habitats and ecological principles here in Illinois. And basically birding and bird watching is a hobby of mine. It has been a hobby of mine since 1999. With one of my first internships with the National Audubon Society at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary in Naples, Florida. And it's just bloomed since then. So hopefully you'll get a little taste of that through my presentation. You'll be able to hear my passion and notice that I do like to get out and bird whenever I can and learn about different bird species and their migration and different hazards that they encounter along those migrational routes. If you have any questions, we'll have that chat box up at the very end, and I'll hopefully be able to answer them for you. We'll go ahead and get started. All right, time to fly. Why do birds migrate in the fall? The answer to everything in life is food, or at least it is for me. Birds move south in search of food resources as winter approaches. In a lot of different bird species, scientists have found that it's not so much a trigger of temperature, but a hormonal trigger that they'll start storing up on different food sources, especially those that can transfer into fat for energy. This occurs when the availability of those resources, such as insects, berries, and nectar, dwindles or disappears for the season. Of the more than 650 species of North American breeding birds, more than half are migratory. There are 4 different flyways in North America. Here in the Midwest, we are part of the Mississippi Flyway. Occasionally, we will see bird species from other regions of the continent that venture away from their flyways in search of resources or due to weather patterns. Recently, if anyone follows eBird, which is an online source as well as an app on your phone, or you follow the Illinois Birding Network on Facebook, it's a Facebook group, we've had recent spottings of the scissor-tailed flycatcher in southern Illinois to central Illinois, and this species is usually in the Southwest. The only time I've ever spotted and recorded a scissor-tailed flycatcher was when I was on vacation several years ago to Texas visiting family. We've also had the magnificent frigate bird in central to southern Illinois recently. It's now moved on. This species is typically only found along southern coastal waters of the Caribbean, the Florida coast, and the Keys. And then just a couple weeks ago on the Illinois Birding Network, one of the admins had mentioned to keep the hummingbird feeders up. Rule of thumb, you keep those up until the feeder literally frosts during the day, because you can get some late migrants or some that are off the path, such as the Anna's hummingbird that was just recently spotted just across the Illinois border into Indiana. To migrate or not to migrate. Permanent residents such as cardinals do not migrate but stay year-round due to adequate food sources. They're usually looking for seeds, and we'll talk a little bit more later about what types of seeds to put out for them. Short distant migrants move short distances, say from a mountaintop to the valley. Some of our short distant migrants in the area, if you ever go up to Montrose Point or around the shores of Lake Michigan in the fall, that is where they're recording a lot of the hawk migrations. Medium distance migrants cover a small territory that could span several states, such as the blue jay. Long distance migrants typically move from breeding grounds in North America to wintering grounds in Central and South America. How do they do it? How do they know? They don't have a built-in GPS system per se, like most of us do in our cars nowadays. They can cover thousands of miles year after year with little deviation from their original route. Some species, however, will take a different migrational route in the spring that they might take in the fall. Scientists are still researching their amazing navigational skills. They have recently uncovered that they use several different senses, including the sun, stars, Earth's magnetic field, and use of landscape markers. Some bird species such as waterfowl and cranes, such as the sandhill cranes that have been spotted quite recently, still actually today, they're still posting around Lake and McHenry counties, follow specific pathways with important stopovers in areas they know they can rely on those habitat requirements, such as water, shelter, and food. Just recently, I think they've moved on now, though, this past week. But for the past month, we've had about 5 sandhill cranes and 1 whooping crane here in the Starved Rock area hanging around, basically storing up on some of that food. Smaller birds, such as warblers, travel in broad fronts following weather patterns and seasonal food resources. Sometimes the Doppler radar can pick that up, and sometimes you will notice on the Illinois Birding Network, if you follow the group on Facebook, they'll post those storm fronts coming in, and the Doppler radar can actually pick up those migrating birds when they're traveling in larger groups, either right in front of the storm or right behind the storm. And sometimes when you have storm fronts like that, birds will drop and rest until the storm clears. And that's a good time to go out and look at some of those field puddles for some of those shorebirds. Fat equals fuel. To help birds prepare themselves for the long journey away from home for the winter, they build up body fat. So they fuel up with certain foods and reserve up to 50% of their body weight. I wish that was okay for some of us, including myself. Some migratory birds, such as warblers, will gain twice their body weight before migration by eating foods such as aphids and various fruits that can easily be converted from sugar to fatty acids. Other migrants will have stopover areas along their flyway where they can refuel by gorging on food resources available. Some of our migration wonders. Birds in migration can travel as far as 16,000 miles. To reach their destination in time, some travel at speeds of 30 miles per hour. At this speed, birds take up to 533 hours to reach their final destination. Traveling 8 hours a day, it would take some birds 66 days to reach their migration destination. This means the birds have been traveling a long time by the time they get to your backyard. And this is one of the reasons why it's important to keep those feeders up during migration and even through the winter for those that stay on. Most birds, like the rose-breasted grosbeak that we'll talk about in a minute, they actually will fly through the night. Say they're leaving Illinois in the fall, they will make a journey in one night to the Gulf of Mexico. So there's no rest for the weary. Not all birds travel low where we can see them. Songbirds travel at an altitude as high as 500 to 2,000 feet. Geese and vultures have been known to travel at altitudes of 29,000 to 37,000 feet high. Some scientists believe that birds travel at higher altitudes to conserve energy with less flapping of the wings and more gliding. So they're traveling on air currents. They move it up and down altitudes to gain boosts of natural lift from changes in density. With an average weight of 1/8 of an ounce, hummingbirds are the smallest migrating bird. They can travel as fast as 30 miles per hour when migrating. Their migratory path takes them across the Gulf of Mexico twice a year. They fly this nonstop, which can be as far as 600 miles. That's a very long journey for such a small bird. The Arctic tern has the longest migration of any bird in the world. These black-capped, red-bellied birds can fly more than 49,700 miles in a year, making a round trip between their breeding grounds in the Arctic and the Antarctic, where they spend their winters. The fastest bird goes to the great snipe. It flies around 4,200 miles at speeds of up to 60 miles per hour. No other animal travels at such speeds for such long distances. Birds usually utilize those tailwinds, as mentioned before. The bar-tailed godwit can fly for nearly 7,000 miles without stopping, making the bird with the longest recorded nonstop flight. During the 8-day journey, the bird doesn't stop for food or rest, demonstrating jaw-dropping endurance. To prepare for the extremely taxing effort of migration, birds enter a state called hyperphagia, where they bulk up on food in the preceding weeks to store fat, which they'll later use for energy in their long journeys. Some birds, like this black-polled warbler, almost double their weight before flying 2,300 miles nonstop for 86 hours. Many migratory birds, but not all, fly at night, navigating in the dark. So while we're in bed napping, their wings are flapping. The reason for this is because colder air temperatures reduce the danger of overheating and allow birds to fly further without having to stop and cool down. Also, dark skies tend to hold fewer predators. Birds migrate during certain times of the day to avoid potential threats. Their biggest threats on a long journey home in the spring include predators like owls or hawks, dehydration, starvation, if they're along the coast, oil drilling rigs in the ocean, windmills, power stations, and drastic climate change. Sometimes natural occurrences like harsh weather play a role, but many times human activities are the cause of birds' untimely demise. In the United States alone, up to 1 billion birds die each year from window collisions, and approximately 7 million die from striking TV and radio towers in North America annually. So how can we lend a helping hand? Well, for instance, at the park itself, I fill the feeders several times a week, and we have both hanging feeders, platform feeders, and ground feeders. And then I also put out hummingbird feeders. I do not bring the hummingbird feeders in until it begins to frost during the day. I use wild bird food mixture of different seeds. You can find this at any store, from Walmart to Rural King to Farm and Fleet. And I also have a feeder for black oil sunflower seeds that are going to attract your cardinals, Niger seed for your finches, peanuts. Peanuts are a great source for blue jays, suet, nuthatches, and your various woodpeckers will be attracted to the suet. That's going to be high energy for them. And then again, of course, nectar for the hummingbirds. Pictured here are different types of hanging feeders. I do not have a platform feeder pictured, but it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just a simple platform. Some have roofs on them, some do not. Ground feeder, again, it pretty much explains itself. Just piece of wood with some sides that you can put on the ground. Some people will stake it a little bit above the ground. Winterizing your yard, something you want to keep in mind, especially in spring when you're starting to plan out your yard, if you have a yard, or maybe if you're volunteering for master naturalists or master gardeners and you're helping to construct a habitat-friendly landscape or garden. You want to think of a mixture of hardwoods and conifers for shelter for the birds and cover. And you want to make sure you have different levels covered, from ground to bush height, anywhere from 10 to 20 feet above the ground, and then a canopy. You can add bird houses. Water source. If you don't have a creek or a pond or a lake nearby and you want to put out a bird bath, there are many different options found online, even Amazon, where you can buy heating elements that can heat the water and keep it circulating throughout the winter. And natural food sources. So even if you're putting out bird feeders and feeding with wild bird seed, black sunflower, oil seed, you want to think about the different plants, different shrubs that continue on through winter that hold on to their berries for different birds migrating through. Elderberry in some areas of Illinois still holding on to their berries. Bittersweet, you have juniper or eastern red cedar hold on to its berries. Unfortunately, the Amur honeysuckle, which is quite invasive, one of, I guess, the positive things you could think of is it does provide a food source for birds this time of year, but then also those birds end up propagating that Amur honeysuckle when they're done with the berries and the seeds come out. But you can find different things. Wild chokecherry will have it, or chokeberry. Just ask your landscape, your local nursery, or do a Google search online, and it'll bring up different native shrubs to Illinois and what you can plant. Okay, now we're going to cover some of those migrants that are popping in on their way south this fall. So some of the migrants will actually start even as early as July, all the way up through some later migrants that just don't get the message until later in November or sometimes December. At Starved Rock, we actually had a couple of white pelicans hanging around until January last year. They just didn't get the memo, or they just didn't want to leave. One of the earlier migrants is going to be the Baltimore Oriole, as well as the Orchard Orioles. And they're mainly getting the cue when their fruit and nectar source has diminished with the growing season. They're going to travel up to 1,000 miles to Florida, even into the tip or the northern range of South America. Ruby-throated hummingbird. Again, and they don't all, say, hey guys, we're all leaving on such and such date, such and such time. They'll travel in mixed flocks, and it won't all be together. So some that might start migrating here in Illinois doesn't mean that others have already started, say, in Minnesota. So that's why we see them coming throughout the fall. Ruby-throated hummingbirds, 500 miles, they're traveling to the Caribbean, even down into Panama. Now, the evening grosbeak, some years, depending on cone production, will create what we call eruptions, finch eruptions, involving also the grosbeaks. And this year, it happens usually on cycles of every 2 to 3 years. This year, we're starting to notice that eruption. So some of you might have already seen online, or maybe even at your own feeders, the evening grosbeaks. And they're a beautiful bird. And they are an irregular migrant. It's a fall eruption. So basically, they're not migrating far away. They're simply migrating for food source. Rose-breasted grosbeak. Now, the picture shown here is actually what their fall winter plumage looks like. They don't have that bright rosy red breasts that they show in spring, which is part of their breeding plumage. They're traveling south to Central America and South America. American goldfinch, they're traveling south to the southern United States. And you might even still notice finches, American goldfinches at your feeders through winter, depending on the weather and what feed you put out, such as the Niger seed. Those are mainly going to be the males. Most of the time, the females are those that are migrating south to the southern United States. Same with the house finch, pictured here. Eastern meadowlark, they're simply, sometimes, I mean, I've even seen them some winters still hanging around. They can adapt, but they will travel south to the southern United States, depending on the weather and depending on what food they can find. And they're mainly an insect eater. Purple finch, again, they're a regular migrant, fall eruption, and the purple finch, they'll have more of that reddish coloration throughout their body as opposed to the house finch that you mainly just see around the head and a little bit of the chest area. Some of you might have already noticed the red-breasted nuthatch. They, again, are part of this fall eruption. They're coming down when cones are not present further north, so they're seeking food sources. I typically see these guys every winter at our Star Rock feeders. They're a little bit smaller than their cousin, the white-breasted nuthatch. And you can see on the whole torso that peachy pink color. But I guess it just doesn't sound catchy enough to say peach-breasted nuthatch. Pine siskin, again, another portion of that fall eruption seeking food sources. I know a lot of folks have been posting pictures of pine siskins gathering at their feeders. Indigo buntings, this is my husband's favorite bird. He always looks for them every spring, and we kind of have a little contest to see who's going to be the first one to spot the indigo bunting. They travel 1,200 miles to South America, and they're one of the earlier migrants. They're heading out at the end of summer, early fall. I always know that fall is starting to turn temperature and we're heading towards winter when you start hearing the grackles and the red-winged blackbirds coming through. They are moving to the southern United States. And then also, to me, they're one of the first signs of spring. When I see the turkey vultures in the air, the white pelicans are heading back, and I can hear that conclary of the red-winged blackbird. Now, some of our winter feathered friends that will hang around with us throughout the winter are the blue jay, and you can definitely put those wreaths of peanuts out for them. They love peanuts. Some of the common calls that you might hear. And then, of course, we have the cardinal, state of Illinois bird. And this is one of the cheerier signs I see in winter. I always love seeing that bright red pop out amongst the tree branches and the white snow. And the black-capped chickadee. The black-capped chickadee, this is one of the birds that I love introducing to children, especially on my guided hikes or when I have a bird program with younger students, because they love being able to mimic the sounds of different birds. And the chickadee, if you're patient enough, will actually call back to you. And I also love birds that have simple names that basically their call is their name. So the chickadee literally says its name. So chickadee dee 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 dee. I'm sure the parents after my programs don't appreciate when the kids the whole ride home are saying chickadee-dee-dee-dee, chickadee-dee-dee-dee. And the dark-eyed junco. So the dark-eyed junco, if anyone is a Game of Thrones fan, this is the bird I think of saying winter is coming. Every time I dread seeing the dark-eyed junco because I just know that winter is heading our way. They are definitely a cold-weathered bird, and they hang out all winter long. And you can attract them to your feeders. They mainly stay around the ground. They're mainly a ground feeder. I don't know why the blue jay started playing again. There's the junco. Maybe it's just a blue jay in the background. Oh, it's not, there it goes. All right, the house sparrow. So right now we are also seeing the Eurasian tree sparrow, and they're similar in appearance to the house sparrow, but their head will have a little bit more coloration back around the temple area, amongst other things. House sparrows are quite common. And then my favorites next to the cardinals in winter are the woodpeckers. And woodpeckers are going to be attracted to the suet that you're placing out at your feeders. You can get anything from the downy to the red-bellied, not necessarily the red headed, but a lot of the downy and the red-bellied. And this is actually a male. You can see that little red spot on top. The female will not have that red cap. Then the red-bellied woodpecker. Oops, wonder why it's not playing for me. Here it goes. And another one of my husband's favorites, the white-breasted nuthatch. And we get quite a few of these in our yard here at home, as well at Starved Rock. I also like teaching children this call, just yank, 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 yank. They're little noise boxes. All right, and then some that you're not necessarily going to see at your feeder, but you might see in your yard or your neighborhood in winter or even here. The great horned owl. In winter, owls are starting to pair up. You might hear the female and the male calling back and forth to one another. They start their mating season earlier than most birds, and they're usually sitting on their nests here in Illinois by February, if not early March. Oh, I guess that didn't record, I'm sorry. Well, basically the great horned owl is the who, who, who. The mourning dove. Mourning doves are going to be ground feeders. You're not going to see them up top on a feeder. They're going to be down at the base with all of the seed that is basically spilled out from either squirrels invading your feeders or messy birds at your feeders. And again, they kind of say their name, they're mourning. It sounds like they're mourning. Oops, too far. Eastern bluebird. A lot of people feel that the bluebirds migrate. They're a short distance migrant. They're gonna follow food source, but if there's warm pockets or if they can adapt to berries, they will stay in a given area. For the past, oh goodness, 5 or more years that I've been doing the winter bird count, for the Starved Rock Audubon, we've had at least 20 to 40 bluebirds. We always find them at the horseback campground area at Matheson State Park. So there's water that flows through there, through the Dells area. So they have water, they have plenty of shelter, and they're finding a resource of food. Some folks I know will go to the local pet store and they'll buy mealworms, or you can now buy mealworm pellets or even mealworm suet that you can place out for them in winter as well if you'd like. Okay, the hairy woodpecker, he's going to be the size of your hand, a little bit smaller than the red-bellied, but larger than the downy. Occasionally I'll see them here at my home, and occasionally I'll see them at the park. Red-tailed hawk, especially when the farmers are done in the fields, they're hanging out at every other telephone pole, surveying those fields for voles and mice. See if I can do that again. It wasn't that loud. And if you've been to Starved Rock, you know that in the winter, typically areas along major riverways such as the Illinois River or even the Mississippi River, especially along those locks and dams, we have bald eagles that are coming in basically because it's a free fish buffet. Their territory in northern ranges, the riverways have frozen over, so they're trying to find food, and they flock to the rock, to Starved Rock, because of the Starved Rock Lock and Dam. That water is always churning, so it's a free fish buffet for them, and they'll literally fight with one another over the fish. You'll see them trying to steal each other's fish on the ice. They hang out on the islands right in front of the lock and dam, just to the west of the lock and dam there, called Leopold Island, which is owned by the federal government, and then the larger island further down called Plum Island, which is owned by the Illinois Audubon. And my favorite thing to do, it probably annoys my family and friends, is whenever we're watching TV or a movie and they show a bald eagle, and I guarantee you every single time it's a red-tailed hawk call. They're never using the bald eagle call because they probably don't think it sounds fierce enough. Right now, we have had recent reports that we have up to about 17 bald eagles hanging out in what we call the wide waters. That's the shallow area just east of the lock and dam of the Illinois River. They're hanging out on the floating logs and the sandbars there, probably hoping they can catch a free duck that one of the duck hunters clipped, or catching some fish. We've also had the white pelicans hanging out in large groups. They're starting their migration, heading back south. Eastern screech owl. So if you put wood duck boxes up, most of the time, this time of year into spring, you might have a friendly eastern screech owl that says, hey, thanks for providing the free apartment. Kind of sound like they're whinnying like a horse. And we did actually, for quite a few years, have a red-phased eastern screech owl utilizing our wood duck box, but we just recently had a pair of great horned owls move into the area, And usually when there's a great horned owl around, you're not going to have a large population of eastern screech owls. Great horned owls can actually be a predator to these guys. They're pretty tiny. The barred owl says, "Who cooks for you?" And then the wild turkey. This time of year and even into the spring, we see quite a few turkeys at the park. Usually I'll come across them early in the morning when I'm coming in for work, or if I'm staying later in the evening. The only time that I have ever seen ring-necked pheasants at the park is in winter. I just don't know if my eyes aren't trained to see them any other time of year, because the male's body perfectly camouflages with plants and grasses in the prairie or the fields during the rest of the year. But it's usually after the first snowfall, I typically see a pair or more on 178 right there in Matheson, crossing between those two fields. These are actually non-native, but they have filled the niche of the bobwhite quail as well as the greater prairie chicken. American tree sparrow. You see a lot of these hanging out in the trees, especially in winter. And the snowy owl. So if you check eBird, usually in the months of December through March, people are tracking eBird to see where snowy owls have been spotted. They're coming down from Canada and northern Canada all the way down into the US in search of food. Sometimes even the males are being pushed out from their territory and searching other territory for food. It seems every other year I get a snowy owl. The years in between, I'm one of those people that is basically finding more and more white bags or white buckets in the field. So the years that I do get a snowy owl, I'm very happy. And they're that bark that you can hear. Very faint. All right, so useful resources. Resources that I always use when I'm planning a bird program, even a program such as this, is audubon.org. This is a National Audubon Society website. Allaboutbirds.org, which is operated by Cornell University. Also, joining local Audubon chapters. You can go to www.illinoisaudubon.org and you can look up different chapters in your area and ask to join. And they usually have weekly, if not monthly, meetings. They'll call in different presenters or speakers. And you can also just meet like-minded friends that like to go birding, learn about different bird hotspots in the area. And that's basically how I learned. When I worked at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary in Florida, I came to work as a forester. I have a forestry degree, and I I looked at trees and plants and ecosystems. I wasn't a birder, but the volunteers at the sanctuary kind of took me underneath their wing, and one of them even gave me my first pair of binoculars, and I was hooked. Birding is an addiction, I tell you. And ever since then, I just keep learning more and more and more year after year. And then when I moved back to Illinois, a couple of the volunteers at Starved Rock, Tom Williams is one of them. He just basically took me under his wing and taught me what he knew. And he's the one that I go birding with every winter for the count, and then again in the spring for the count. So I definitely recommend reaching out to other birding communities, Audubon chapters, or joining the Illinois Birding Network. My phone, so I do carry around mainly in my car, and then I have one also at my desk at work. I utilize the Peterson field guides. That's just my preference. Let's see if I can share my screen and show you a picture. Okay, see if it'll show it. So this is, it's kind of backwards, sorry. This is what I use, Peterson field guides for birds. And I like it because it not only gives the pictures, both female, male, juvenile plumage, but it also gives a range map for breeding, non-breeding, and migration, and then gives you different facts, including the habitat they like. So different little tidbits. Most birding field guides will do that. So it's basically your preference. Now, when I'm in the field, depending on Wi-Fi signal, I will use my phone, and there is an app. And again, this is by Cornell Lab. And basically most of my research, I go through Cornell to find what they have. They're kind of the leading authorities on ornithology. And Merlin app, I really like because you can download continents. And right now I have all of North America on my phone. It doesn't take up much space, and you can explore birds. So this is for someone that's a little bit more advanced, where you pretty much know what family or what type of bird you're looking at. So say, for instance, you're out at a lake and you see birds in the water and you say, hey, those look like ducks. Well, go ahead in Merlin and type in duck, and it'll bring up all the different types of ducks. And then you can kind of look through each one to compare. And then you can click on the map to see if it's within range. So Merlin is the app that I personally like to use. For those that are beginning in bird watching, I would recommend utilizing your field guides, your books first. eBird, again, eBird is mainly, you can type in your region, your state, even your zip code. You can even type in the species. So say in winter, I'm going to type in snowy owl. And eBird is where other birders can put a pinpoint or a ping for when they spot a bird. Guidebooks on birds, again, you can find these at local bookstores, Amazon.com. And then again, I already mentioned the Cornell University Lab of Ornithology. Okay, and that is it. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, Lisa, we do have a few questions for you. I'm going to go back up a little bit here. Hold on. Okay. Could you give us an idea, now that we've had this little cold snap in Illinois as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, what are some of the last bird species to go in the fall that will be leaving our area or coming through and that we'll still see for a few more weeks?
Well, right now, most of them have already come through. You're going to still see some of these irregular eruptions of the finches and grosbeaks. You might still have a straggler of a hummingbird or two. Other than that, you know, the best thing to do is just follow Illinois Birding Network. I mean, I'm still learning myself of these that are coming through late. And again, it differs, you know. I mean, some just kind of straggle behind. I was really shocked that the whooping crane hung out for as long as it did at Starved Rock. It just didn't get the memo. It needed to migrate.
I can imagine. Also, do some robins stay all winter?
Yes. Yes, robins, like bluebirds, they're a short distance migrant, just like the blue jays. So basically, if they're comfortable where they're at and they're finding their habitat requirements of food, water, shelter, they're going to stay. So we do get robins every year on our winter bird count.
what should we be adding to our bird feeding to keep the robins happy?
Well, there's nothing you can really add per se to your bird feed. I mean, you can try getting some dried berries, but it's more about landscaping. So if you have native shrubs that are going to provide those winter berries for them, that's what keeps them around throughout winter.
Okay, I see.
Because they'll
all right.
adapt from their worm diet to more of a berry diet. I haven't heard if anyone's tried enticing them with mealworms like the bluebirds. That'd be interesting to find out.
Okay, well, we'll report back if we have any success with that. Okay, so what is the best placement for feeders in a typical yard? How far away from the house or other buildings?
Well, it's not necessarily within proximity of a house because there are feeders that people can attach directly to their windows. I personally don't like those kind of feeders because I feel like it adds more to window strikes. I personally keep our feeders here at home. They're about 40 feet away from the house. And I always look for enough coverage. So you're not going to want to put a feeder out in the middle of an open pasture or field per se, because then you're just opening it up as a free buffet for things like sharp-shinned and Cooper hawks or even red-tailed hawks.
Okay.
So definitely something where they can perch or have shelter and then swoop down to the feeders. Now, the negative side of that is that you are going to have some squirrel use of those feeders as well. And it'll drive you crazy trying to think of different ways to deter the squirrels. But in the end, I just figure, you know what? They're wildlife too. It's for everybody.
Yeah, that's what I keep saying every time we restock those peanuts. Several people have mentioned that they've seen the juncos recently, and then someone mentioned having a pileated woodpecker at the suet feeder last winter.
That is wonderful.
So which brings us to, how can I keep my suet cake from being taken by non-birds? Many mornings I look and the cage is open and the cake is gone.
Oh, so what you can do with that is we bought small chain link chain with small metal clips. And what I do is I clip the cage closed on 2 different sides and hang it that way from a tree branch or from the metal posts of the feeder. And that keeps the suet cake inside. I haven't had a problem with that.
Okay, so you put actual clips on the container.
Yeah, so the hinge door,
right,
where it's open, when you flap it down, you clip it closed with, and you can even buy metal carabiners for that too.
Okay, all right, that's certainly a good suggestion. Someone mentioned that found a book at a used bookstore. The book is called Sparrows and Finches of the Great Lakes Region and Eastern North America. And she has found this to be very helpful in distinguishing sparrows and finches. Also, there is information on cardinals and other similar birds. So that's something that we can all look for. And don't forget about your library. I have to put in a plug for the library. We have a lot of books on birds here. And I'm sure since we have people from all around beyond our borders, you can certainly get helpful birding books at your area libraries. Let's see, we have another one here. Do herons or egrets stay for the winter?
So they are also a short distance migrant. Again, it's all about food. And yes, we've had great blue herons on our winter counts before, but a bulk of them will move further south into the southern United States.
Okay. Can we put out our leftover pumpkins for the birds, the ones that we didn't decorate or have any wax in?
Yeah.
Thoughts of bacon grease for making homemade suet? Question mark.
Yes.
You can
yes
use
and yes.
grease. Okay.
So pumpkins, yes, we toss ours over the hill here at home, and the deer, the squirrels, all sorts of animals will go after them.
We recently, just a few days ago, I think, put a homemade activity on the library's Facebook page where you cut smaller pumpkins in half horizontally and scoop out the seeds and then use each half as a container for sunflower seeds or other kinds of bird seed. And it's very easy to hang them using twine, to give everybody a chance at that too. If you want to refer to that on the library's Facebook page, it's a pretty easy activity.
Yeah, you can also do that with oranges. I've seen people do that with oranges, coring out the middle of an orange after you slice it in half and use that as a little feeder. There's so many things online and through Pinterest of making suet feeders or suet cakes or different types of bird treats that you can hang in the tree. There's even themes for decorating a Christmas tree outside using bird treats. I love Pinterest.
Don't we all? I see somebody who's also saying twist ties is a good idea to use as hanging
Yes.
elements. So that's something else. I wanted to mention too, because I think that's the end of our message, our questions. I wanted to mention that when someone was asking about landscaping, the University of Illinois Extension Office has tremendous resources on that, in addition to area landscapers and other people you can talk to. So don't forget about using the Extension Office when you're planning your landscaping for your yard. As a matter of fact, we did a program on landscaping for birds, and that is archived on our website. So you can refer back to that recording. And I think that's it for questions. Lisa, as always, I want to thank you again for a wonderful program, very informative. Thank you to our audience for attending despite some little problems that we had with a lot of weather. I know that we had some difficulties getting some people on. So for those who know this and know other people who are interested in this kind of program, please refer them to the recording. It will be up on our website tomorrow. I'm going to ask Lisa for you to, I think Meg is going to share a slide of the University of Illinois Extension Office. Meg, are you there to do that?
Oops. Yep, she started.
There we go. Now, if you have any other questions or information that you want to get from the Extension Office, this is all the detail on that, and it also will be included in the recording, so you can always refer back to it. Information about the Master Naturalist program, the Master Gardener program, other Extension Office programs, and contact information. So again, thank you all for attending. I very much appreciate it. Don't miss the next program next week, which is Emily Kenny's best laid plans of her trip hiking up Mount Rainier. Don't miss it. It's always interesting when Emily hikes. So thank you again. I'll be closing for now. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Donna.